Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a skill that is near and dear to us Diablo 1 players' hearts. It is Apocalypse. Apocalypse, like some of the other ones, actually, pretty much all of the fire skills are D1 skills, by the way. Flame Wave is literally Flame Wave from D1, and Immolation is Ring of Fire. And Apocalypse, if you guys remember in Diablo 1, was one of the most overpowered skills because it hit everything on the entire screen. You just pressed a button and boom, everything got masterfully blazed in a ball of fire. Well, that's basically how Apocalypse works. Apocalypse has the same exact effectiveness. It literally just makes a huge flame wave basically on the ground. It kind of draws like its own little pentagram and everything. Man, if this thing existed in Diablo 2 back in the day, I think our parents would have never let us play the game. Because it literally draws a pentagram and then explodes and makes all the monsters ignite with Apocalypse. Boom. I think it's even the same graphic as Apocalypse even. Now, at lower levels, it's only 15 radius, and it does increase in radius. I think it's like every 10 levels or something, or every 5 levels. I can't remember. It also goes up with negative fire resistance. Now, a lot of people have already made this mistake, is that the negative fire resistance on the skill is only applying to the skill. So if you look at the skill, it says creates a pentagram that engulfs all enemies in hellfire, reducing enemy fire resistance for Apocalypse damage. That means that it only affects Apocalypse, guys, unfortunately. Now, as you level it up, it does get more radius, it does get more negative resistance, and it seems to cap out at about 17 yards because it doesn't seem to go any higher than 17 yards. The negative fire resistance does actually seem to keep going up, and if you have enough plus to skills and various other things, I'm just throwing some points in so I can get my plus to skills. It does go up pretty high in the negative resistance department, enough that you could potentially rely on this, honestly, for like breaking fire immunes if you have a Sunder. So, like if you have the Sunder, it brings them down to 95, and then you have this, and it's negative 40%, and then that brings them down to, a very comfy, what is that, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, so like 55% fire resistance, which isn't too bad for a fire immune. And it's going to work pretty good well against monsters that are not fire immune, also for the same reasons. Now, Apocalypse does have a casting delay. The casting delay is fairly long, at 1.8 seconds, and this is, of course, including your casting delay. So a lot of people get really confused about this, and I'm going to try and explain this the best I can, so that those of you who want to build Apocalypse builds this season can get the most out of your Apocalypse. Essentially, how it works is a second is broken up into 25 frames. So 25 frames. If you take this, which is 1.8 seconds, and you go 1.8 times 25, you're going to end up with 45 frames approximately. Now, the reason why you end up with 45 frames is because this is almost 2 full seconds. So 25 plus 25 would be 50. But it's not. It's technically 1.8. However, we also have our own casting delay to take into account. So faster cast, or whatever your faster cast is on your character, is also going to add to this total. So 45 is the number of frames that it currently is. But for instance, if you have 10 frame faster casting, then you're going to add 10 frames to that, and that's going to give you your 55. Now, the thing about this is that you can decrease your faster cast frames, but you cannot decrease the delay. So the hard delay of 45 frames is always going to be there. But if you have really bad faster cast, like say you have 15 frame faster cast or something, then that's going to bring it up to 60 frames, which if we divide that by 25 is going to be like 2.4 seconds. And the skill only has a casting delay of 1.8. So theoretically, you can bring the overall casting delay closer to that 1.8 seconds by increasing your faster cast rate, which of course is going to decrease the overall frames that you have on your character. As far as I'm aware, unless somebody has any different information, the Warlock has the same faster cast frames, I believe, as the Necromancer. So you can just take a look at those and see where you want to lie on that list. Now, the unfortunate side effect of this means is that, well, decreasing or increasing the speed of the ability, even by minute amounts, might not necessarily have the drastic effect that you're looking for. But over a long period of time, like for instance, if you're at 2.4 seconds per cast, as opposed to a lower cast rate, you can get off more or less, basically, apocalypses, right? So if it's a much slower apocalypse, you're going to get off less over a long period of time. And in fact, let's do this over like a 60-second period, right? So let's pretend that you have a 2.4-second cast time character, and we over 60 seconds, we divide that by 2.4. That's 25 total casts. If we take another character who has the 45 base frames, but then they have, let's say, I don't know, 8 frames on their faster cast because they're running a lot of faster cast, and then we divide that by 25, we're going to end up with 2.12. So if we take 60 seconds and we divide that by 2.12, we're going to end up with 28 casts instead of 25. So basically, for a large amount of faster cast, you can potentially get off like maybe 3 or 4 extra, like apocalypses, in the same time period as somebody else with a slower, faster cast, if that makes any sense. Now, the delay on this is actually not only like in the casting, but it's also in the actual application of the ability. So, like, the entire delay is actually the time it takes for the ability to go off, which means that you do have to wait for a significant amount of time for the ability to actually fire and cause the hellfire to hit the targets. It is a rather large effect, though, and if you have it capped out with all of the other synergy bonuses, it does some pretty significant damage of 12,115 to 14,225, and then on top of that, it also has the negative resistance as well, which means that, you're looking at some pretty significant fire damage. The thing about the casting delay is that it's so long that you're probably going to end up using something else in the meantime. So you're probably going to end up using either Flame Wall in between casts, or you're going to be using Ring of Fire in between casts, one or the other. This is definitely going to make for an interesting gameplay loop because you're going to have to decide like which ability you want to use in between your Apocalypse. Apocalypse also has kind of like a really high mana cost. As you can see, it costs 69 per cast, which, of course, yes, it is delayed, but 69 per cast can be burned through really quickly. As you can see, if I just hold down the button here, I'm able to burn through my mana at a pretty astounding rate. And that's, of course, not including anything else that I might be casting in between. So this build is going to be kind of mana hoggy. Now, the negative res on it is actually really nice, but you can potentially get more negative res if you go into the demon tree. So, if you may not have actually considered this, but the Summon Tainted actually makes for a very good option for basically a 1-point wonder. And Consume, also a very good option for 1-point wondering. So what you're going to do is you're going to summon forth a Tainted, and you're going to eat him with the Consume ability. And if you do that, you're going to get a very nice negative 15% enemy fire res, which is going to stack on top of your Apocalypse's 40, and then you're going to get plus 20% fire skill damage as well, which is going to definitely help out your ability in a massive way. So now my Apocalypse is doing 15,690, and then I have, instead of 40% negative res, I have 55% negative res, which is actually really sweet. Now, there are other monsters that you can consume if you bind them. So if you do want to go down a little bit further and you want to get access to the Bind Demon ability, there are a really big list of demons throughout the game, super uniques and specifically, that have huge amounts of negative fire res. In fact, if you were to consume Pitspawn Foul Dog, Witch Doctor and Dugu, Battle Maids, not Battle Maid Serena, that was magic. Made for Dragon Hand. There's so many of them. Infector of Souls, Sharptooth, no, not Sharptooth, Doc Farron, Colenso the Annihilator, Ventar the Unholy. There's so many that give negative fire res between 42 to like negative 50. That if you combine that together with the huge negative res that's already on Apocalypse of negative 40, and you get an additional negative 50, then that means that you're going to be sitting at negative 90 for Apocalypse right off the bat. And with the addition of Asunder, you're going to be able to murder pretty much everything in the game utilizing the Consume method. Now, the Consume method does require you to go actually bind the demon, though. So there is the cheaper version, which requires less skill points. It's the Summon Tainted. Depends on what you want to do. The Summon Tainted is also a fire damage character and can potentially add to your fire damage total, so it could be interesting to have some Summon Tainted on your side as well. There's also the Blood Boil ability, which is also fire related, and going into basically the fire tree means that you may have other options that you might have at your disposal. Or you could just use some Goatmen as some tanks to get the pressure off of you while you're firing off your abilities. That all works too. All in all, the fire tree is definitely going to be a really popular one this season, although I'm going to caution you right now about the fire tree. Unless they fix it, the Thunder Charms are currently very rare. We spent about 3 days farming with like an entire kinship, entire clan, and we got one latent charm in 3 days, and it was a hork. It wasn't even a drop; it was a hork from a barbarian, and it was from one of the heralds. So we horked one of the heralds and got one of the charms. So to give you a little bit of perspective here, fire might not necessarily be the best starter, unless you have another way to deal with fire immunes, or you're in a group and it doesn't really matter. Like if you're in a group and you have lots of people with you that can make up the difference of the different immunities, then it's not going to be a big deal. But if you are by yourself, fire might be a rough starter, especially considering that the fire immunes start really heavily in nightmare difficulty. The negative fire res on apocalypse does not break resistances, doesn't break immunities. It will reduce fire res, which is really nice, but it doesn't actually break anything. There is the Blood Boil ability if you wanted to go down that route for fire until you get your Sunder. It does actually have physical damage as well as fire damage. So there is kind of like an interesting fire setup there where you could potentially use Blood Boil to bypass that. Or you could just simply have some Goatman and some mercenaries by your side to deal with the fire immunes. There's also that as well. All in all, I definitely think Apocalypse is going to be a fun ability. It's really nostalgic to see a Diablo 1 skill. In fact, all the Diablo 1 skills, the Immolation ability, the Flame Wave ability, and the Apocalypse ability all make it into Diablo 2. I think a lot of people are excited to see Diablo 1 abilities here. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you are enjoying the content. And as always, keep watching.